Welcome back to part 6 of this advanced Photoshop training. And what we're going to do in this section is we're going to give her hair a little bit more contrast. And we're also going to get rid of some of these flyaways and make this a little bit neater up here. Now, you may be fine with this, and this is, again, just to really show you a technique and maybe a possible approach on how to do this. And this is just how I would do it. You could go in here, and we're going to start with the flyaway hairs here before we start with the contrast. That's the easy part, so let's start with the hard part. Now you could go in here with your smaller brush, smaller healing brush, and just start meticulously getting rid of these hairs a little by little. It would be a little tedious. I haven't tried to do the whole thing, but as you can see as I go through here, you can see where this would go. You could possibly get rid of this. Well, not possibly, but you most certainly could. Be a little tedious, kind of time consuming, and up here would start getting really dicey. Okay, so let's undo all that. And now we're back to where we started. I should have put that on a new layer, but I was just showing you what you could do. And it would take a little bit of patience to do it that way, but you could certainly do it. But probably a little bit more, I don't know, realistic way. Now it's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to take quite a bit of work. Is to take some of this skin down here that we know does not have any flyaway hairs on it and move it up here. The problem with that is obviously it's a different color. And secondly, and most importantly, it's a different texture. You can see the pores in here in her forehead a lot clearer than you can on the pores up here. And we run into that in various areas all over the human face, is that we generally have larger pores here on our cheek. We have much finer pores and different skin type underneath the eyes, as we do on the chins, as we do over here on the cheeks. I mean, it's different. And when you really don't realize this until you start editing or retouching faces and stuff, that the textures all over the face are completely different. But because we haven't gone in here, and one of the things we're going to cover is softening the skin a little bit, I'm not too concerned about putting this up here because I think it's all going to get smoothed out anyways. But let's give this a try. Secondly, this headband that she has, whenever you find something on top of the skin, it's generally a very good idea to select it and put it on its own layer. And then that way, any skin or whatever we put up here, we can put behind this headband, and we don't have to worry about exactly matching it to the curvature of all these little diamonds and pearls on this headband. We just don't have to worry about it. And if that doesn't make sense to you, it will here in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is make a selection of this headband. And you could go in here and use the quick selection tool, but I've tried it with the quick selection tool, and it's wanting to select the skin in between. See, we don't want to select this in here. We're trying to keep this as realistic as it originally was. And you can see it's just not doing a terribly good job of making this selection. So probably an easier way, since these are all round items, now it's probably a little more time consuming, but it'll be a much more accurate selection, is I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool, and I've just quickly hit the M key on the keyboard to select that marquee tool, but you could of course click on it, select it right here. And I'm just going to individually go in here and select, since most of them around the diamonds aren't quite round, but I think we can get away with it. We're going to select that, and I'm holding down the shift key. As you can see, as I put my selection tool in here, if I hold down the shift key, you see the plus sign. That means we're going to add to the selection. So I hold down the shift key, I start dragging, then I can let go of the shift key, and then I can hold down the space bar and move the selection to where I want, drag to resize it, position it to where I run it, let it go. Hold down the shift key, click, drag, let go of the shift key, hold down the space bar, click and drag until I get this to the right size, let go. And I'm just going to keep repeating that real quickly throughout here. and selecting each one of these. And I'm not concerned about the shadow right now, although that's going to be something we're going to need, because it's going to look, and I'll show you, it's going to look funny if we take this shadow out. But that's yet another layer, and we're going to go in there and simulate or remake this shadow. So let's do this for each one of these. Now I'll probably skip ahead here because I don't want to bore you with selecting each one of these. Okay, so I finished my selection here. So now I can take the lasso tool, and again I'm pressing the shift key to add to my selection. I'm just going to cut through the center of these, and I really want all of this too. And I've added to our selection. Now I kind of made a mistake right in some of these spots where I took too much and went down to the skin, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to come back here and do this again. And I really on that particular one want to come down here, and I'm being pretty meticulous here, going through here, and that's probably a little bit better. Now I can come down here and let me move this over, go up here and complete the selection. So now I've added to that selection. So I've selected this. Let's go down here a little bit more and add this. So like I said, this bottom part, we just want, I want the shadow and stuff, because this is going to be on its own layer. But because we're not moving it, it's not going anywhere, you won't even know, you won't even see that this thing is on its own layer. Now I have noticed when I add this skin up here, I might end up going further out into here and further out into here. So I'm going to select just a couple of more of these pearls and diamonds on this headband, just in case. So I'm going to go here. This is probably more than I need to, but let's just do that. I'm going to do the same thing on this end. Let's add to this a little bit. There's that one. There's that one. Okay. So now we're covered. So we could go in here and I could just copy this to a new layer, but I want to refine the edge here because I want to know what kind of selection I have. So that looks pretty good right there. I mean, that looks nice. And around something like pearls and diamonds, you want a hard edge because that is actually what is there, is a hard edge. So I'm going to leave it as is. I'm just going to cancel this. And then I'm going to take this selection and copy it to its own layer. And of course, by now you should know how to do this. You just hit Control J or Command J on the PC, and that puts it right here on a new layer. Now we want to take some of this skin and we want to move it up here. Since this is roughly the shape of the skin we want, what I tend to do is, and we're going to go we're going to go a little bit larger than what we actually need, right? Because we can always trim it back easier than we can make it larger. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line right here using my lasso tool about the size of the piece of skin. I'm going to cut into this headband, and I'm going to say, okay, we need about this much skin. So now I'm going to drag this down here. I'm going to say, okay, I need this section of skin. Now, here's a problem, obviously. I don't want to include any eyebrows. So that means we're going to have to make some choices here if we're going to use this method anyways. I'm going to have to shrink this. I'm going to have to do something I really don't want to do, but we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But again, because we're going to come back and smooth the skin, I think we can get away with this, and we'll find out. I'm going to make a smaller selection and bring it up here and increase it. Exactly what I said I didn't want to do. So I'm going to go in here and hit Shift-Command-T, and that's going to give us the ability to free transform this selection. And then I'm simply going to shrink this selection to where I think it's actually, we can get all skin, no eyebrows here. And boy, I'm having to really manipulate this and make this a lot smaller than I wanted to. I'm, being careful not to get too much of this shadow. We got mostly skin. I think this is probably good about right here. I'm going to hit return to accept that transform. And now I want to copy this area of the skin to its own layer. Now currently I'm on the layer of, the headband we just created. So if I did that from here, I would get an error. So you have to make sure you're on a layer that actually has this skin on it before you jump the selection to a new layer. So now I'm going to hit Command J, Control J on the PC to copy this selection of skin onto a new layer. And again, you can't tell anything at this point, right? But if I go to my Move tool right here and I click and I drag, now you see this piece of skin. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo to put it back. Let's go up here to our headband layer. Let's label these so we know. I'm going to call this skin, and we're going to call this headband. I don't know if that's two words. Headband sounds like the name of a band, but I'm leaving it. So anyways, if we move this, now we can see we have headband on a new layer. Command Z to put that back or to undo that move. So now we do want to move, this skin is already under the headband, and here's what's kind of cool about it. See, as I move it under the headband, it disappears. I move it up here, look at that. So now you can see not only the color, but the texture is nothing like the skin that's already there. So you're like, now what are you going to do? Let's go ahead and make the skin the same size as it should be up here. And I'm going to hit Command T to do the free transform. And we're just going to, I'm also going to hit the Command key as I get to this corner over here. And that's going to allow me just to move this particular anchor point independently of everything else. If I don't use that and I just cursor, all I can do is, change the ratio, which actually may work for me. So I'm just going to use that. So we're going to go about this big. And you can see the problem with this is it's making her pores. I mean, it's bad enough they're there, but now it's making them larger. But again, smoothing the skin, I think will help us get rid of that. So now I've resized that. I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter to accept that scaling. And you can already see the fact that since we do not have a shadow behind this headband, it looks funky. So I'm going to try to reposition this skin. I want to make sure, do you see like between these two? I want to make sure that I'm getting, further enough down in here to where I'm covering, I see the skin through each spacing of the headband. And I know this it takes a lot longer to explain than it does to do. If I wasn't having a talk and explain this, you can see where I would have been here a long time ago. So we've done this. Now what we want to do is let's create a mask on this layer. And how do we do that? We should know that by now too, right? We hit this little mask icon down here. And that puts a mask on our skin layer. So now I'm going to take our brush and I'm going to paint with black. Black is in the background, so I'm going to hit the X key to swap the foreground and background, or you can hit this little arrow here to swap it. See, every time I hit it, it swaps the foreground and background. So we want black in the foreground. I want a smaller soft edge brush. We must almost always use a soft edge brush. I think probably 90% of the time I use a soft edge brush. We want to make sure we're at 100%, flow is at 100%. And then we're going to go in here and just start creating a mask on this layer. Actually, I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush because that'll let me use this softer edge. And we just want to blend the skin into what's already there, right? We want to get rid of that hard edge, basically. And remember, if we go too far here, we do too much, we can always hit the X key again and swap foreground, background, and start putting that skin back, right? So we can, it's like erasing and putting it back, erasing and putting it back. So that's the beauty of obviously a mask, is that it's not destructive. You can go in here and take it in and put it back, right? So now you can see we've got rid of the flyaways. We've got some pretty decent skin up here. The only thing that's not realistic is it's too bright. Now, it may not look too bad right now, but if we really want to take this to the next level, that doesn't look very good. I mean, the edge here looks okay. We probably need a few flyaways that we could put back in here because that's just a little bit too clean. We're going to explain to you in a minute how we do that. So how are we going to take care of this skin color? Well, let's turn off the layer of our new skin and let's see what our bottom skin layer actually looked like. It was quite a bit darker. And you remember our technique earlier that we used to make this skin color match this skin color. Well, we can do the same thing for matching this skin color to our new skin color. But I think we could probably do this by our eye and get away with it. So I'm just for a reference, I'm putting my eyedropper over here and I'm looking, well, let's turn this layer on or let's put our cursor on the layer that we're looking at. We have to do that or we won't see any numbers down here. So as I put my cursor over this area, you can see the numbers that we're getting down here in the lower right hand corner. See the RGB? See how those numbers, and I'm just kind of taking a quick mental snapshot of this. I'm seeing 195, 196, 156, 138, somewhere in that neighborhood. If I come down here, the white, 220, 210. So really, let's just look at the red to keep it simple. The red is 198. The red down here is 218. Okay. We can also look at the CMYK. The cyan is 22%. Down here it's 10%. So we're looking at roughly a 10% variance in this color between these two. So let's turn our skin layer back on, and I want to put a curves adjustment layer above that. And when I adjust this curve right now, it's going to adjust the entire picture, okay, which is what we don't want. Except for our headband, of course, because our headband is above this layer, so it's not affecting that. But we don't want to affect the whole image. We just want to affect the skin layer. So we add to this what we call a clipping mask. And we can add a clipping mask. In other words, this right here will add a clipping mask, which you don't see. You click it and you'll see this little indentation. You see a little down arrow. What that means is that this layer, this adjustment layer, will only affect what's immediately below it. So it will not affect this layer or any of the other layers below it, just the one that's immediately below it. So now if you see, if I click and I move on this adjustment layer, it's only affecting that skin layer, right? So all we want to do is, let's see if we can get away with just making it a little bit darker, just to kind of match what used to be up there. So I'm going to call that pretty good. So let's see our before and after by turning off and on this layer. So there's our before, there's our after. I think that looks quite a bit better as far as skin color. I'm not talking about texture yet, just skin color. So now let's talk about the hairline, if we can make this a little bit more realistic. If you can, when you can, you should always use existing elements that are already there to help you make replacements. Now this side of your hair looks different than this, but it wouldn't be horrible because people part their hair in the middle all the time. If this side looked very similar or exactly the same as this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select our layer that we have down here, layer 9. Let's zoom in here. And I'm going to take my lasso selection tool and I'm going to select her hair right here. Now it looks like I'm going into the skin here. I'm going to actually come down here a little bit. But we're really not selecting any of this skin. And that's because we're on this layer. What we're seeing is these layers above it. So let's turn off these layers. So now you can see what I'm actually selecting. I'm selecting her hair, some of her forehead, some of these flyaways, etc. But remember, you should always select a little more than you need because we can create a mask and get rid of and trim back. I'd rather trim back than go back and have to try to add to it. So we're going to take a little bit more than we need. Again, we're going to take this selection, copy it to a new layer. We're going to do that by Command J, Control J on a PC. And now let's call this layer New Hair. Okay, so we have New Hair. And let's turn these layers back on. But we have our new hair layer below all the new skin and this adjustment and the headband. Now we want it below the headband, but we want it on top of the skin. So here's the skin. So all we got to do is move it. I'm going to click and drag it. And we just want to drag it in between the headband and the new hair. So we let go of that. So now you see our hair, oops, let me go to the move tool here. Our hair is kind of on its own layer. All right, I'm going to hit Command Z to put it back. I'm going to hit Command T to free transform that. I'm going to right click on that, or if you're using a Wacom tablet, control click, and I'm going to select flip horizontal. So now that we've done that, I'm going to drag this hair over here where it needs to belong. Now, because I flipped it, her hairline is completely whacked out. It's facing the wrong way. I mean, when it was turned the other way, we had this, let me get this out of the way. We had this direction, and then when I flip it, of course, it's going to have this direction. So now I just need to rotate it really into place. So we're going to do something like this. And I'm going to try to match, you know, her hairline. And remember, let's see here. Let's rotate this even a little more. I'm rotating this. I'm not really trying to match this hairline with that because we're going to mask most of this out. I'm really just looking at this area of the hair down here, and I want it to match this hair up here. So maybe something, I don't know, let's move. I don't know how this got way out here. This is the center point, like where I want it to rotate on. So I'm going to leave that in the center about right here. And I'm thinking something like that probably looks okay. Let's just see. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to hit the enter key to accept it. That's not looking very good, but now we're going to blend this in by putting a mask on this layer. We should know how to do this by now, right? So I'm going to select this mask tool. Now we put a mask on our new hair layer, and we're going to select our brush tool. And we're going to go here and get rid of all this. We don't need this. And we just need to blend this hard line in right here. And most of this hair we really don't need. We just need that kind of front part. So you can see where I'm just blending this back to where it matches a little bit better. Because really all I'm wanting is this front edge here. So let's see if I can make this match a little better. And I'm doing this because I want this more natural shadow that's underneath the hair right here, and I want to couple these little flyaways. So I'm going to go back to my brush here, get a little bit smaller brush, get rid of this hard edge in here, maybe even this in here. Now you can see we're still seeing kind of a distinct edge there, but we kind of see it back here because of the highlight running through this hair. So just to make that blend a little bit better, we're using this brush at 100%. I'm going to go to 50% and just go past over here a little bit, just to kind of get rid of that edge a little bit. And I might do it back here just to make it look a little bit more realistic. Back here, it's a little lighter, so I'm going to flip the foreground and background. And I'm just tweaking this, guys, to make this a little bit more realistic for me, anyways. So I'll make that a little bit darker back there. And how am I making that darker? Remember, this layer that's on top is being masked out. I'm bringing the mask back. So remember, here's what it looks like without the mask. Here's what it looks like with the mask. I'm holding down the shift key and clicking on the mask, and so that gives you an idea. This turns off the mask, turns on the mask. Off the mask, so you can kind of get an idea what it looked like before and after. So really all we're using is this little area of hair right here to give it some more, make it look a little bit more realistic. Because I don't really want it to look exactly like that, we can get away with transforming this hair. I'm going to right click and hit the warp tool, and this will just allow me to kind of drag this and kind of shape it a little bit better to where, you know, the way I might want it. We don't want to distort it too much because the hairs start getting too big for the surrounding hair that's there, so your brain will pick that up and make it look funny. So now I think we've done a pretty good job of blending that in. We've kind of given her a little bit more flyaways to make it look a little more natural. This area right here, which is not, it's okay. It's okay. But if we wanted to, we can go back down to our skin layer. I'm going to go to the mask layer, go back to my brush, and just maybe tweak this a little bit. make that blend just a little bit better. Same thing right over here. I like, you know, that shadow underneath the hair. See what a big difference that makes when I start bringing that back in? Keep in mind I'm at 50%. So it's just enough to give you that shadow and make it look like, okay, that's coming back, and make that look a little more natural. Now, here's the good thing. Since we're really zoomed in here, if it looks pretty good at, look down here, we're at 140%. Here's what the image looks like at 100%. And that's if you printed it. If you did projected images, it'd probably look more like this, which is going to look, you know, realistic. So let's see what our work has done, all our hard labor here. Let's turn off all these layers. So that's where we were before, and here's where we are after. Now, you may say, well, that was a lot of work for, I like it better like that. That's fine. Do it or leave it. I'm just showing you the techniques on how you might go and approach in another situation where absolutely you needed to fix this. So that's just the technique to use up there. We're still going to get to some skin smoothing to get rid of this, but that's going to be a little bit later. So for now, we're going to leave that. Let's move on now to giving the hair up here a little more contrast. So I'm going to click up here on my top layer, and we're going to use a curves adjustment layer. I use curves adjustment layer for just about everything. It's a very, very powerful tool. It's worth the time of playing around with it and getting used to it. So anyways, we did a curve adjustment layer, and remember, it's not clipping to anything, so it affects the entire image. So let's zoom in here a little bit so we can get a good look at her hair, and let's give it a little bit of contrast. So an easy way to do contrast, you can use a preset, and we'll just say, oh, how about a medium contrast? Now, that's doing the entire image. We just want her hair. So because this is a white reveals, in other words, reveals the adjustments that we make. Black conceals or hides the adjustment we make. So it's going to be easier to cover the entire image so we don't see any of the changes and just reveal the hair than it is now to go back and black out the entire image, right? So let's fill this with our background color. Which currently is white, is not going to help us. So let's switch our foreground background color. I'm going to hit the X key, and I'm going to hit Command Delete to fill with our background layer. And that's Control Delete on a PC. So now the changes that we made, we're not seeing at all. Again, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And we're going to go with our brush tool, and we're going to paint with white with a soft brush. Now remember, I'm at 50% from the last time. I want that to be 100%. And I'm just going to go in here and paint her hair to give it a little more contrast. Now, the nice thing about this, we're just seeing a little bit of change here, and that's all we really want to see. And we can go back in here after the fact. Okay, let's look at our before and after and see if we even like this. There's before, there's after. So it's darkening her hair, giving a little more contrast. So we can go back in here to our curves, click on one of these points, and pull it some more, and give it even a little bit more contrast if we want. Maybe the darks are too dark, so we can move this up so they're not so dark. But keep in mind, the straighter we make this line, the less contrast. So maybe we just want to go up here and make it a little brighter. And you can use, once you have one of these points selected, instead of clicking and dragging, it's if you want to fine tune, you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move it left, right, or up and down. So I'll select the black area, and I'm going to use my arrow key and move that up a little bit so it's not so contrasty. I'm thinking about that. Again, let's go back before and after. So there's before, there's after. So I think it looks a little flat there. Gives it a little more pop right there. And just, these are subtle changes. You can see her hair better matches now from this area right here. Let's turn this back off. Look at the difference between her hair up here and the contrast, the highlights and the shadows in this area of her hair. If I turn this layer back on that we just did, to me it better matches that. So it looks more consistent. Over here, all this is in shadow, so we don't really see that. Now, if we wanted to, and I'm not going to go into it, we could go back to our raw file and bring this up a little bit to where we see a little more detail. But that's just to taste. If that's something you want to do and you want to see a little more detail, you can do it. But I think it's fine the way it is. So let's zoom back out here. And let's look at our work again. So let's turn all these layers off. So that's before. And that's after. All right, now that we've done the skin, we've done the hair, let's talk about the shadow that really needs to be underneath this headband. Remember, if we go back and look at our original headband, it had, let me zoom in here a little bit, it had this shadow behind it. It's barely there, but you see the shadow down here because of the way the direction of the light is coming from this, from her top right, it's coming this direction. So you're not going to see a lot of shadow, maybe on the left side of everything over here. But, just to do this 100%, let's talk about how we'd put that shadow in there, which is going to be actually pretty easy. So let's turn these back on. And we're going to need a layer between the headband and that skin, right? To show a shadow, we have to show the shadow has to be on top of the skin, but behind the headband. So here's our headband, and our skin is down here. So as long as we put it somewhere in between here, so what I would do is I would put it right underneath the headband. So let's create a new layer. We do that by clicking the new layer icon down here, or you can hit Shift Command N for new, or Shift Control N on the PC for new. That brings up a new layer dialog box. This is a good opportunity to name it. We'll put headband shadow right there. And we already had, remember we already did this outline of the headband. We already have that. So why create a new selection to create a shadow? And here's our headband. If we hold our cursor over this, pressing down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC, and we click, we can bring up that outline or that selection. So we're already on our headband shadow layer. We want to fill this with the color of our shadow, which, since we already have a shadow, let's select our eyedropper tool, take a sample of the color of this shadow. Most people would just put black, but really this is the color of the shadow, right? Is this color. So we select that. So we're going to press Option Delete or Alt Delete on the PC to fill with our foreground color. Now obviously that's way too much and really not what we want. And actually I put that layer on the wrong level, didn't I? I needed to put this headband, because when we hit new layer it put it above the headband. So we need to drag this below the headband. Okay, so now we don't really see it. We kind of see this outline, and we see, if we zoom in here, this nasty outline. But we're going to soften this. So we don't need anything, let's say from this line that we see here on our headband below. We don't need any of that. So we could go in here and we can either create a mask and take it out, or we can just use the delete. But I know I don't want it. So I'm just going to go in here and erase this. We don't need any of that. And so then we're going to take this and we need to blur it. Let's move it up. It's right behind the headband. So if I move it up, you can see there's our selection. There's what's going to be our shadow. But remember, the light is actually coming from this direction. It's coming this way. So as we saw before on our original, we don't really see much shadow on this side. All the shadow we see is on this side, obviously because of the direction of the light. So if we're going for perfection here, we raise the shadow up a little bit, maybe just a tad, and then really to this side. So that's going to be our shadow. Now the only problem is, obviously it's not a hard edge shadow. We need to soften that up. So we simply go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And now we've got it was preset at 108, which is way too much. So let's start way down here. 103, I'm sorry, 1.3, there's 2. Let's go a little more. Something like that, starting to look a little better. I'm going to go to 3.5. Okay, I think that's good. I'll hit OK. And now it's a little too heavy. Obviously it doesn't look quite right. So let's come back down. I'm using my, I hit the move tool here, and I'm just using my up and down arrows to adjust this background layer. So I'm thinking about something like that. Looks a little more realistic. I'm going to go with that. So let's turn it off and on and see our before and after. There's our before, after. Again, we're starting to look a little more realistic. Now we see it sticking out over here, which we can simply erase that. But let's just get this correct first. So there's our before and after. I like that. I think it's just enough. It adds just enough to make it look more realistic. If we wanted to, we could go in here and play with our opacity. Is it too strong? Is it too, maybe something right, I'm going to say right here about 75, 80%. Let's go 80% to keep it exact, 80%. So I'm good with that. Before and after. We'll go over here with our erase tool and get rid of this. Don't need the shadow over here, obviously. Again, another reason before and after is good is you can see any other mistakes that you might have. I'm seeing a little bit, look right here as I turn this off and on. You see that little shadow? Now, no one would notice that, but I see it, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Okay, so I think we're done. We replaced the hair. We could fix this a little bit right here where this hair is coming out, but I'll let you do that on your next venture. And we've added a little contrast to the hair. So what are we doing next? Let's look at our reference here. So we've done just about everything. Flyways. We have maybe a couple of things we get rid of out here. That's a piece of cake. We're going to take care of the bottom of these shoes. And one thing I haven't put on here that I do anyways, I guess that's maybe why I didn't put it on here, is soften the skin. Of course, that's what we ultimately want to do here to this. She really doesn't need a lot of it, but because we've changed the skin texture up here, and she does have maybe some pores and stuff here and blemishes, we are going to, soften the skin up a little bit. We never did talk about this mole on her face that I think the makeup artist put on here. And we could tweak that, but that's getting way, way detailed. So let's do some skin smoothing in the next video.